Have you ever heard a dog cry for help? Not for himself, but for someone else? Because once you do, you'll never forget it. This is the story of a German shepherd named Rex, a police dog who refused to give up when everyone else did. The rain was pouring, the search team was gone, and a 7-year-old girl was still missing. They told Detective Mark Rains to stand down. But Rex? He kept searching. And what happened next still gives me chills. We live in a world obsessed with logic and protocol, but sometimes it's love and instinct that save a life. And that's what this story is really about. The loyalty of a German shepherd, the courage of a man who listened to his heart, and the unspoken language between the two. I've spent years studying and sharing true stories like this, moments where animals remind us what it really means to be human. So, if you've ever loved a dog, or wondered just how deep that bond can go, stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you'll see why I believe one truth above all. Love is the strongest command a dog will ever obey. The morning light came slow that day, spilling pale gold over the quiet streets of suburban Texas. The frost on the windows caught the sunrise and glimmered like 1,000 tiny mirrors. The air was so cold, it seemed to crackle. Even the sparrows were silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside a small blue house on Elmwood Street, Emily Carter, 7 years old, was tugging on her red mittens. They were too big for her, and she giggled softly as she tried to pull them snug over her wrists. Her mother, Grace, knelt to fix the scarf around her daughter's neck, tucking the ends carefully into her coat. The scent of buttered toast and the faint warmth of coffee lingered in the kitchen air. "Don't forget your backpack," Grace said, smiling. That tired, gentle smile of mothers everywhere. Emily nodded eagerly, hoisting her pink backpack onto her shoulders. It was worn and decorated with tiny stickers of stars and dogs. One of them, a little German shepherd cartoon, was peeling off at the edge. Outside, the faint rumble of the school bus engine rolled down the street. The yellow vehicle emerged through the morning mist like something steady and familiar. Emily ran to the door, her boots thumping against the floorboards. "Wait! Your hat!" Grace called after her, laughing softly as she reached for it. But Emily was already halfway down the porch steps, blonde hair flying, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Grace followed to the edge of the walkway, wrapping her own sweater tighter around her. "Emily, don't forget to look both ways." Her daughter turned, smiling so bright it almost outshone the pale sun. "I know, Mom." It was a simple exchange, one that happened every morning, only this time, something in the air felt different. A strange stillness hung over the neighborhood. Grace couldn't explain why, but as she watched Emily walk down the frosty path, her chest tightened. Maybe it was just the cold. Maybe it was nothing. The bus came to a slow stop near the corner. The driver waved. The hiss of the brakes sounded like a sigh. Grace lingered, watching Emily's small figure approach the bus. She could see the fog of her daughter's breath, the way she adjusted her backpack strap, the playful skip in her step. Everything about it was so ordinary, painfully ordinary. Then the moment fractured. A phone rang inside the house, just once. Grace turned her head instinctively. It was only a second, maybe 2. When she looked back toward the corner, Emily was gone. Her heart lurched. The bus doors were still open, but no little girl was climbing inside. The driver frowned, leaning slightly out of his seat to check the sidewalk. Grace took a few steps forward. "Emily?" she called, her voice light but uncertain. No answer. She walked faster, the crunch of frost loud beneath her boots. Emily! The bus driver shook his head, confused. She didn't get on, he said when Grace reached him. Thought maybe she ran back home. But she hadn't. Grace's front door was still open, the scarf she'd dropped fluttering in the wind. Panic began to rise. Not all at once, but in creeping waves that made her breathing shallow. She called again, louder this time. Emily! Her voice cracked on the second syllable. The sound echoed against empty driveways and quiet porches. Neighbors began to emerge. Curious, faces in bathrobes, holding coffee mugs. Someone turned down the volume of a radio. The calm of the morning shattered, replaced by the frantic rhythm of footsteps and questions. Grace's hands trembled as she ran up and down the street, calling until her throat burned. She saw the tiny footprints on the sidewalk, her daughter's, but they stopped halfway between the house and the bus stop. Just stopped. The pink backpack lay near a row of hedges, half unzipped, a pencil sticking out. Grace froze. Her body knew before her mind did. A scream tore through her chest, raw and primal, the kind of sound that doesn't ask for help, only releases despair. Within minutes, patrol cars swarmed the neighborhood. Police sirens wailed, slicing through the morning calm. Red and blue lights bounced off the frosted windows, painting the street in colors that didn't belong there. Neighbors pointed in every direction, toward the woods, the drainage canal, the empty lots near the edge of town. Someone said they saw a white truck earlier. Another swore they heard a cry. But no one knew. The air was thick with fear and confusion. Grace sat on the curb, clutching the small backpack against her chest, as if it could bring her daughter back. Her knuckles were white. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She was just right there, she whispered to an officer. Right there. The officer, young, nervous, nodded, but his eyes darted toward the fields already filling with uniformed men. He didn't know what to say. Nobody did. Overhead, the helicopter blades began to churn, chopping through the cold air. Dust and frost swirled across the yards. The world had become noise and motion, barking dogs, radios crackling, orders shouted over static. Grace barely noticed any of it. All she could smell was the faint sweetness of her daughter's shampoo on the backpack straps. That smell, strawberry and vanilla, made her chest cave in. She closed her eyes and pressed her face to the fabric, whispering, "Please come back to me, baby. Please." As the morning stretched into afternoon, the neighborhood that had once been a picture of calm suburban safety transformed into something surreal, a maze of flashing lights, muddy boots, and fear. The frost melted under the weight of footsteps. Police tape went up. The sound of the helicopter faded, replaced by the dull hum of engines and murmured prayers. By dusk, the once bright house on Elmwood Street was dark. Only the porch light stayed on, a beacon for someone who never came home. Inside, Grace sat by the window, hands trembling as she held the last piece of Emily's mourning, a mitten still resting on the table, its pair missing. Her tears fell silently onto the fabric. Outside, the bus route continued. Tomorrow, it would stop again, doors opening with that same tired hiss. But the little girl who used to run toward it, laughing, wouldn't be there. And somewhere in the cold Texas night, the first quiet whisper of dread moved through the town, the kind that clings to walls and hearts alike, the kind that tells you, life will never be the same again. The world had gone silent, and in that silence, the story truly began. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the precinct was the only sound cutting through the dead hour of night. Empty coffee cups crowded the desks. the smell of cold caffeine mixing with the faint metallic tang of stress and exhaustion. On the far side of the room, a man sat hunched over a map spread across the table, eyes rimmed red, tie loosened halfway down his chest. Detective Mark Rains, 42, looked like a man carved from long nights and longer regrets. His face carried the kind of weariness you can't fake, the quiet, slow erosion that comes from too many cases and too few answers. Beneath the desk, Rex, his German shepherd, lay curled in the half-light, amber eyes half open, alert even in rest. The faint rise and fall of the dog's chest was the only sign of calm in the storm of human despair. The caseboard behind Mark was cluttered with photographs, school pictures of Emily Carter, her smile framed by missing baby teeth. Red string traced paths between maps, timestamps, and handwritten notes, but the lines led nowhere. It had been 48 hours since the girl vanished. In cases like this, every hour mattered, and the window for hope was closing fast. Mark rubbed his temples and exhaled, staring at the map as if it could confess. His notepad lay open beside him. Bus stop, 7:12 a.m. Bus driver sees no one after 7:10. Footprints small, heading south, not toward bus route. One larger print alongside, faint, size 11 work boot. He flipped back to a photograph of the scene. Frost melting under the morning sun. The imprint of little boots near the hedge line. Something about it gnawed at him. The driver's statement didn't match. The timeline didn't fit. The footprints led away, not toward the bus. "Rains!" a voice called from across the room, sharp and worn thin. Captain Torres, broad-shouldered, eyes hard as the badge on his chest, stood by the doorway with a file in hand. "We've got search teams covering the entire neighborhood grid. Riverbank, East Fields, Old Mill Road. You're off duty in 2 hours. Go home. Get some sleep." Mark didn't look up. "She's not near the bus route." Torres sighed, patience thinning. "We've been over this." "No," Mark said quietly, fingers tracing the photograph's edge. "The prints don't add up. The timing doesn't either. Whoever took her didn't come from the neighborhood." "Rains." "I've seen this before," Mark interrupted, voice low but steady. "In 19 Dallas, kid went missing. Everyone thought it was local. Turned out, she'd been picked up 5 miles off the search grid. You follow procedure, you find nothing. You follow instinct, you find truth." Torres's jaw tightened. "You want to talk instinct? Last time you followed it, we spent 3 days chasing a ghost lead. You let emotion get in the way, and I'm not doing that again." Mark finally looked up. For a moment, the silence between them felt like a wound reopening. His eyes were bloodshot but clear, the kind of clarity that comes from refusing to surrender to exhaustion. "Sir, I'm not saying ignore the rules. I'm saying the rules don't always save kids." Torres dropped the file on the table. "Don't get sentimental again, Mark. You can't save everyone." Mark's voice broke slightly, not from anger, but something deeper. "Tell that to her mother." The captain turned away, shaking his head. "Get some rest. That's an order." When the door closed behind him, the room fell back into heavy silence. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady, indifferent. The kind of sound that made you realize how slow time moved when a child was missing. Rex shifted under the table, sensing the tension in his handler. His ears perked, tail brushing lightly against the chair leg. Mark reached down, absently stroking the fur behind Rex's neck, the motion grounding him. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Rex's eyes lifted, steady and unblinking. A quiet, knowing look passed between them, a conversation made without words. The phone rang suddenly, sharp against the quiet. Mark grabbed it. "Rains." "Detective," came the dispatcher's voice, tired but alert. "We've got a report. Resident on Willow Creek Road says they found a small shoe near the drainage ditch. Size looks like a kid's." Mark's pulse quickened. "On my way." Within minutes, he was out the door, Rex at his heel. The night air hit him like ice, the kind of cold that burns. The drive to Willow Creek was short, but every second felt heavy. The flashing patrol lights cut across the empty road, painting the frost in streaks of red and blue. At the scene, a small crowd of volunteers and officers gathered near the ditch. A child's shoe lay in the mud, pink, soaked, frayed around the edges. The mother's sobs echoed nearby, her voice hoarse from 2 days of crying. Grace Carter stood by the police tape, clutching the other shoe, the one Emily had worn the morning she vanished. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. When she saw Mark approach, she stepped forward. "Is it hers?" she asked, voice trembling. Mark hesitated. "We can't confirm yet, ma'am." But in his gut, he knew. Grace swayed slightly, her hand tightening around the shoe. Then, without warning, her knees gave way. The world seemed to slow. An officer lunged forward to catch her, but the sound that came from her lips froze everyone in place. It wasn't a scream. It was something deeper, the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Mark stepped forward instinctively, catching her hand. "We're going to find her," he said softly. "I promise you that." Her eyes lifted to his, wide, wet, desperate. "Please, she's my baby." Behind them, the flashing lights pulsed across the fields. Mark looked out into the darkness beyond the tape, the empty stretch of road that seemed to go on forever. He felt the weight of every failure he'd ever carried pressing down on his chest. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "No kid just vanishes into thin air," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Beside him, Rex pressed against his leg, resting his head gently on Mark's knee. A silent promise of loyalty, of belief. Mark looked down at the dog, then back into the dark horizon, where the river mist began to rise. Somewhere out there, the truth waited, buried beneath mud, fear, and time. And as long as Rex still breathed, and Mark still believed, the search would not end. The morning broke gray and breathless, the kind of dawn that looked bruised by the night before. Mist clung low over the fields as Mark Rains eased his old black SUV off the paved road and onto the dirt trail that wound toward the Trinity River Basin. The radio crackled with chatter from the official search teams, updates, coordinates, procedural noise. But he reached over and turned the volume down until only static remained. The department had marked this area as too far to be plausible, too far for a child to wander, too remote for an abduction to end. But Mark's gut, that instinct he'd been told to silence, wouldn't let it go. Every lead near the neighborhood had gone cold. Every theory had unraveled. And when all logic failed, instinct was all he had left. Rex sat upright in the back seat, head lifted toward the cracked window, nostrils flaring. His fur bristled faintly, tail flicking once, twice. He felt it too, the faint disturbance in the air, the scent of something that didn't belong. "Yeah," Mark muttered under his breath, his voice roughened by 2 sleepless nights. "I know, buddy. I feel it too." The tires crunched through patches of frozen mud as they entered the basin. The landscape stretched wide and desolate, tangled reeds bending under frost, bare trees jutting like bones against the gray sky. The Trinity River slithered through the land like a living shadow, its surface wrapped in thin ribbons of fog. It was quiet here, unnaturally quiet. No traffic, no voices. Just the faint drip of thawing ice and the whisper of wind through dead grass, the kind of silence that made you listen harder. Mark pulled over near a rusted gate half swallowed by weeds. He stepped out, boots sinking into wet earth. The cold hit him instantly, sharp, metallic, cutting through the layers of his jacket. Rex jumped out beside him, landing softly, nose already to the ground. "All right, partner," Mark said, patting the side of his thigh. "Show me where to start." The dog moved methodically, tail low but steady, tracing invisible lines in the air. His nose swept the path, the grass, the damp soil by the riverbank. Mark followed a few paces behind, eyes scanning for anything. A footprint, a scrap of fabric, a sign that this barren stretch of land wasn't as empty as it looked. The mud squelched beneath his boots. A crow cawed somewhere overhead, the sound echoing across the emptiness. The longer they walked, the more the world around them felt suspended, as if time itself had paused, waiting for them to disturb it. As Rex sniffed along the bank, Mark's mind began to drift, not away from the case but deeper into memory. He remembered the first time he'd met Rex, years ago, at the K-9 Academy outside Houston. The dog had been sitting alone in a cage while others barked and paced. His fur was dull then, his eyes distant. A rescue no one thought could be trained. Aggressive tendencies, the handler had warned. Too much trauma. But Mark had seen something different. Not aggression, but focus. Wounded trust, maybe. The same kind he carried in himself after his divorce, after losing a partner in the field. Two broken things recognizing each other, in silence. Their first mission together had been a standoff gone wrong, a suspect barricaded in an old warehouse. When the suspect opened fire, Mark went down, pinned behind a crate. Rex had charged forward without command, taking the bullet meant for him in his shoulder. Time 800 milestones. He could still remember the smell of gunpowder and blood that day, the way Rex whimpered but refused to fall until the scene was clear. After that, Mark never doubted the dog's instinct again. Now, watching Rex move through the reeds, that memory felt less like the past and more like a promise, one they were still keeping. The wind shifted. Rex froze. His head lifted sharply, ears pricked, muscles tight beneath his coat. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Not fear, but recognition. Mark stopped breathing. His hand went instinctively to the flashlight clipped to his vest, though the morning light was enough to see by. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Rex moved forward a few feet, sniffing along the edge of a narrow path that led down toward the water. Mud clung to his paws. His growl deepened, a sound more warning than threat. Mark followed slowly, every sense sharpened. The path curved, narrowing between clusters of cattails and tangled brush. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth mixed with something faintly metallic, something that made his pulse quicken. At the bottom of the incline stood an old wooden bridge, half collapsed, the kind built decades ago for farm trucks that no longer came this way. Its planks were warped and slick with moss. Underneath, the water moved sluggishly, dark as oil. Rex stood at the edge, body tense, eyes fixed on something unseen. He barked once, sharp, commanding, then growled low, teeth barely bared. Mark crouched beside him, scanning the ground. There, impressions in the mud. Not clear, not recent, but human. Boot prints, larger than his own. The edges softened by rain, but distinct enough to read. He felt his throat tighten. Someone had been here. He moved the beam of his flashlight along the bridge supports. A few strands of pink thread clung to a splintered nail, fluttering in the wind. It was almost nothing, invisible unless you were looking for it. But Mark was always looking. Jesus, he muttered. How did they miss this? Rex's body remained rigid, a quiet snarl still rumbling from his throat. Mark laid a steadying hand on his back. Easy, partner. Easy. But his own heart was racing now. Every instinct screamed that this was no dead end. He pulled his phone from his pocket, hovering over the radio call button, then hesitated. Torres would shut it down. He'd tell him to return to base, log the coordinates, wait for a team. Protocol. But protocol had already failed that little girl. Mark slipped the phone back into his jacket and knelt beside Rex. We keep this between us for now, he whispered. The dog's ears twitched, eyes meeting his handler's with unspoken understanding. For a long moment, they stood there, man and dog, two silhouettes against the pale mist, the bridge creaking faintly in the wind. Somewhere in that gray silence, Mark felt the first flicker of something that had been missing for days. Not certainty, but direction. A pull. A sign. All right, he said softly, straightening up. Let's see where this path leads. Rex barked once, low and sure, before moving forward into the fog. Behind them, the world stayed still. The reeds swaying gently, the bridge moaning like a ghost left behind. Ahead, the mist thickened, and the Trinity River whispered like it carried secrets. Mark followed without hesitation, because when the system said stop, his heart, and Rex, level strong, always said go. The light was fading fast. By late afternoon, the gray sky had thickened into a dull steel dome, pressing low over the Trinity River basin. The wind carried a damp chill that sliced through Mark's jacket, but he barely noticed. He'd been walking for hours, boots soaked, muscles aching, mind caught in a relentless loop of possibilities and questions that refused to quiet down. Rex trotted a few paces ahead, tail flicking methodically, nose low to the ground. Every few steps, he'd stop, lift his head, and test the air before moving again. Mark followed in silence, watching his partner's movements with a kind of reverence. There was a rhythm to the dog's search, patient, instinctive, almost spiritual. The official team was miles away, combing through the neighborhoods with drones and grid maps. Mark knew what the reports would say. No sign of the girl. No trace of struggle. Case cooling. But he also knew how easily the truth could get buried under procedure. Out here, among the mud and reeds, the answers felt closer. He glanced down at the prints in the mud, Rex's paw marks overlapping with his own, and couldn't help but think about how long they'd been walking together. Every scar on his hands, every night spent chasing ghosts, Rex had been there. They didn't need words to communicate anymore. Just trust. The ground grew softer near a bend in the river. The smell of stagnant water and decaying leaves thickened in the air. Rex slowed, ears pricked, his breathing sharpening into short huffs. Mark froze. What is it, boy? Rex turned sharply to the right, nose pressed to the ground. His paw scraped against something half buried beneath a layer of wet silt. He began to dig, dirt and water splashing against his fur. Mark dropped to his knees beside him, brushing away the mud with trembling fingers. It took a second for his brain to register what he was looking at. A flash of pink fabric, dull from dirt but unmistakable. His breath caught. No way! He cleared away more mud, heart hammering. It was a small backpack, the one from the photograph on his caseboard, the same one Emily had worn that morning. The zipper was broken, one strap torn. He opened it carefully. Inside there was a crushed hair clip, shaped like a butterfly, its metal bent out of shape. A few sheets of paper, damp and unreadable. The faint smell of strawberries clung to the lining. That scent, faint but there, hit him like a ghost of a memory. He saw Grace Carter's face in his mind, the way her hands shook as she clutched the backpack in the photos. He took a steadying breath and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Rains. I've got a find near Trinity River, coordinates 32.78 north, 97.11 west. Possible item belonging to the Carter girl, over." Static crackled for a moment, before Torres's voice came through, flat and clipped. "Repeat that, Rains." "I said I found a child's backpack, pink, half buried in mud near the river. Matches the missing girl's description." A pause. Then Torres's sigh came through, the sound of fatigue and bureaucracy layered together. "That area's outside the active grid, Detective. Probably trash washed down river. We've already canvassed that region. Return to base." Mark clenched his jaw. "With respect, sir, this isn't trash. The fabric's dry inside. Hasn't been here long." "Rains," Torres said, tone cooling further. "You're not authorized to conduct solo searches beyond the perimeter. Log the find, and we'll send a team tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Mark's voice cracked slightly, disbelief bleeding into anger. "She's a 7-year-old girl. You really think she can wait till tomorrow?" Static filled the line again. Then, quietly, "That's an order, Rains." Mark stared at the radio for a long moment, his hand tightening around it until his knuckles whitened. Finally, he switched it off. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked down at Rex, who stood still beside him, watching, waiting. "They don't believe it," Mark murmured, voice low and bitter. "But we know better, don't we?" Rex gave a soft whine in response, pressing his wet nose to the back of Mark's hand. The gesture broke something loose inside him. The exhaustion, the frustration, the quiet rage of watching hope get dismissed as inconvenience. Mark knelt fully in the mud, holding the backpack close to his chest for a moment, before setting it gently back down. His breath misted in the cold air. "We're close, boy," he whispered. "I can feel it." Rex leaned forward and licked the mud from Mark's glove, then turned toward the river, nose twitching again. The sun had nearly vanished now, leaving behind dull amber glow that barely touched the edges of the water. Shadows stretched long across the basin, swallowing color and form alike. Mark rose, scanning the horizon. The fog was rolling in thicker, curling through the reeds, creeping across the path like something alive. The first distant lights from the official search crews flickered on the other side of the river, their beams slicing weakly through the haze. He could hear faint voices carried by the wind, muffled, distorted. But out here, it felt like he and Rex existed in another world entirely, a place between faith and despair. The cold bit deeper as night came on. Every sound, the drip of water, the creak of old branches, seemed amplified. Then, suddenly, Rex stopped. His body went rigid, fur along his spine lifting. He stared into the fog, muscles coiled, every sense locked onto something unseen. Mark followed his gaze. "What is it?" he whispered. Rex took a cautious step forward, nose low, then barked once, a short, sharp sound that broke the stillness like glass. The echo bounced off the trees, carried across the water, and came back softer, an eerie repetition that made the hair rise on Mark's neck. Rex barked again, louder this time, his voice raw, urgent. Mark swung his flashlight toward the fog, the beam cutting through white nothingness. For an instant, he thought he saw movement, a shadow slipping behind the reeds. Then it was gone. His pulse thudded in his ears. He wanted to call it imagination, fatigue, the tricks of light and fear. But Rex's growl told him otherwise. The dog's instincts never lied. The air grew colder still. The fog thickened until even the outlines of the trees began to blur. "All right," Mark said quietly, crouching beside his partner. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "If someone's out there, they just heard you, which means they know we're here too." Rex's tail lowered, his stance alert. He gave one last low bark, this time not as a warning, but as a challenge, echoing through the dark like a promise. Mark stood, shoulders squared against the creeping fear, and stared into the mist. The light from his flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. Behind him lay the pink backpack, the only fragile proof that Emily had been here. Ahead stretched a wall of fog, hiding everything he needed to know. Between them, the wind carried Rex's bark one final time. Distant, hollow, but powerful. It sounded like hope refusing to die. And in that echo, Mark felt the truth whisper back to him, faint, but certain. They were not alone. The precinct conference room smelled like burnt coffee and rain-soaked leather, a mixture of fatigue and tension. The blinds were drawn, slicing the early morning light into narrow gray lines across the floor. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the Trinity River, faint but constant, as if echoing the storm already brewing inside. Detective Mark Raines stood at the center of the room, shoulders stiff, hands resting on the back of a chair. His clothes were still damp from the field, streaked with mud. A faint scrape marked his jaw where the bramble had caught him the night before. Across the table sat Captain Torres, uniform crisp, face carved into a scowl that betrayed neither empathy nor sleep. On the far side, Internal Operations Officer Keller clicked a pen slowly, waiting to begin the reprimand report. The air hummed with the electric tension of unspoken words. Torres broke the silence first. "You disobeyed direct orders, Raines. You went off-grid, beyond the assigned perimeter, and conducted an unauthorized search." His voice was flat, the tone of a man who'd already rehearsed this argument in his head. Mark's eyes didn't waver. "And I found something. Emily's backpack. It wasn't nothing." Torres's jaw tightened. "The evidence you found has not been confirmed as belonging to the missing girl. It's been logged for forensic analysis." "You didn't even send anyone to follow up," Mark shot back. "You wrote it off as river debris. You didn't see it, Torres. The zipper was broken. There was a hair clip inside. Her mother described it in the first interview." The captain slammed his hand against the table. "That's enough!" The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "You've been told before, procedure exists for a reason. You don't get to decide which orders you follow and which you don't." Mark's voice was quiet, but sharp as glass. "And what if the procedure is wrong?" Torres stood. "It's not your job to question it. It's your job to execute it." For a moment, neither man spoke. The rain tapped steadily against the windows. Keller scribbled something in her report without looking up. Finally, Torres sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You've been a good detective, Mark. One of the best. But you've let your emotions get in the way before. We've all seen it. You care too much, and it clouds your judgment." Mark's jaw flexed. "You mean it reminds me there's a child out there who might still be alive?" Torres's eyes hardened. "It reminds me that you lost objectivity." Mark leaned forward, his voice low but trembling with restrained fury. You sit here behind reports and statistics and tell yourself that objectivity saves lives. But it doesn't. People do. Instinct does. Heart does. The badge doesn't mean a damn thing if we forget why we wear it. That landed like a punch. Torres stared at him, lips pressed thin. Keller's pen stopped moving. Watch your tone, Torres said finally. You're one bad decision away from suspension. Mark gave a hollow laugh, shaking his head. Suspension? For doing my job? For insubordination, Torres corrected sharply. You're officially relieved from active field duty, effective immediately. Turn in your firearm and badge until further notice. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Absolute. Mark didn't move. Outside, he could hear the faint whine of wind through the hallway vent. Beneath that, softer still, a sound that broke through the tension like a whisper. Rex, whining restlessly outside the door. The sound hit Mark harder than any reprimand could. He turned slightly, watching the shadow of the dog pacing just beyond the frosted glass. Even without seeing him, he could picture it perfectly. Rex's ears back, tail twitching, unable to settle. Torres noticed his glance. That dog's going to stay in the K9 facility until this is sorted. You're both off the case. Mark's head snapped back toward him. You can't separate us. Torres straightened his shoulders. You've left me no choice. Something inside Mark cracked then, not loud, not violent, but deep, like the sound of ice splitting beneath weight it could no longer bear. He lowered his head for a moment, collecting himself. His reflection stared back at him in the polished surface of the table, tired eyes, unshaven face, lines etched by guilt and sleepless nights. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Do you know what they said about Rex when I got him? Torres frowned. This isn't about... They said he was useless, Mark continued, ignoring him. Said he was too damaged, too unpredictable. Rescue dog from a busted meth house in Amarillo. Scar on his shoulder where he was shot, trying to protect his last handler. They were going to put him down. He looked up, meeting Torres's gaze. But I saw something in him. I saw a fighter. And I was right. He saved more lives than half this department combined. He saved mine. Torres's expression softened just slightly, but he said nothing. Mark stepped closer, voice rising with emotion now. And you want to tell me that dog doesn't deserve to finish what he started? That we should stop looking because it doesn't fit a damn grid map? Enough, Torres barked again, but this time there was a crack in his tone, a flicker of uncertainty. Mark stared at him for a long moment, then reached down to his belt. Slowly, deliberately, he unclipped his badge. The small metal piece caught the thin light, glinting one last time before he set it gently on the table. It landed with a sound softer than he expected. Not a clatter, but a sigh. If doing my job means ignoring what's right in front of me, Mark said quietly, then I'll do it without the badge. Torres's eyes widened. You're making a mistake. Mark nodded once. Maybe, but I'd rather make a mistake trying to save a child than live with myself knowing I did nothing. He turned toward the door, the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. As he opened it, Rex immediately stood, tail wagging low, eyes bright with confusion and readiness. The sight made Mark's throat tighten. Come on, partner, he said softly, scratching behind Rex's ear. We've got work to do. Torres's voice followed him down the hallway. Rains, don't walk out that door! But Mark didn't turn back. He could feel Rex's warmth beside his leg, the familiar rhythm of their steps sinking as they moved toward the exit. The storm outside had finally broken. Rain hammered against the parking lot, soaking them within seconds, but neither man nor dog hesitated. Mark looked once more at the night sky, then down at Rex. "They'll call us crazy," he murmured, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "But crazy's saved lives before, hasn't it?" Rex gave a low bark, tail wagging once, eyes locked forward. Together, they disappeared into the rain. Partners once more, stripped of protocol, bound only by the promise that had always guided them both. Never stop searching. The moon hung low over the Trinity Basin, a pale coin of light half hidden by drifting clouds. The night smelled of wet bark and river salt, the kind of cold that clings to the skin, like memory. Mark Rains stood at the edge of the tree line, flashlight off, the beam from his truck already swallowed by fog. Beside him, Rex shifted restlessly, shoulders tense, ears flicking at every sound the forest breathed. They shouldn't be here. Not after the suspension. Not after Torres's final warning. But duty and instinct had never been strangers to disobedience. Mark crouched, his hand brushing the slick grass. The soil was damp, still holding the chill from the last storm. Every rustle, every whisper in the dark seemed amplified, like the woods themselves were alive and watching. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his breath fogging the air. "No lights, no noise, just us." Rex's tail swayed once, the only acknowledgement he needed. His nose lifted, catching invisible threads of scent the way a musician feels the rhythm of a song before hearing it. The forest closed in around them, the trees forming jagged silhouettes against the dim sky. The Trinity River murmured somewhere beyond the hill. Slow, secretive, timeless. It wasn't just a river tonight. It was something older, something sentient, whispering in currents and echoes. Mark's boots sank into soft earth as they moved deeper into the woods. Branches reached low, snagging at his jacket like hands trying to hold him back. Every crunch of a twig felt like it could wake the whole world. It had been nearly 72 hours since Emily Carter disappeared. 3 nights of failure, of reports stacked like gravestones on his desk. But standing here, away from radios and paperwork, he felt something electric again. The pulse of truth, faint, but alive. Rex froze. Mark stopped mid-step. The dog's body was taut, head tilted slightly to the wind. Then came that sound, the low, throaty growl that always meant one thing: scent. "What do you have, partner?" Mark whispered. Rex didn't look back. He moved forward slowly, nose to the ground, weaving between reeds and cattails. His paw prints pressed deep into the mud, a trail of determination under moonlight. Mark followed close behind, heart thudding in sync with the dog's movements. The fog thickened as they neared the riverbank. The world narrowed, sound, sight, even thought. Only instinct remained. Somewhere behind them, a coyote yipped, the sound breaking the silence for just a heartbeat before fading into the distance. Mark's breath came out in shallow bursts. "You sure about this?" Rex didn't answer. Of course. But the look in his eyes was. His pace quickened. The bond between them felt tangible, as if a thread of invisible energy stretched from man to dog. Mark's mind flickered with flashes of memory. The first time he'd trusted Rex in the field. That gunfight years ago, when the dog had leapt between him and death itself. He remembered the feel of Rex's fur slick with blood, the silent plea in those eyes as if saying, "Don't stop fighting yet." He had never ignored Rex's instincts since. The air grew colder. The moonlight turned the river's mist into silver smoke. Rex stopped at a cluster of reeds near a steep ravine, one that sloped down toward the water, where jagged rocks glistened like teeth. He began to pace along the edge, circling, sniffing, growling low. Mark approached, crouching to examine the ground. His flashlight flickered once before he turned it off again, preferring the dim, natural light. The mud bore prints, faint, half erased, one large, one smaller. Human. Child. His pulse kicked. "Rex, you found it again." He scanned the ravine below, but it was pitch black. The river whispered softly, the current slow but deep. His mind flashed through possibilities. Maybe she'd been brought here and taken further. Maybe she'd fallen. Maybe— "Damn it," he muttered, pressing his hand to his forehead. "It can't end here. Not again." He stood, pacing in the mud, every nerve fraying. His flashlight slipped in his hand, casting a fleeting beam across the bank. Just for a second, something caught the light. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch halfway down the ravine. Pink. He froze. "Oh, God." He knelt, squinting, heart hammering. It was too far to reach from up here. The drop looked steep, 15 feet, maybe 20, slick with moss and rain. One wrong step, and he'd be sliding straight into the river. Rex barked once. Not a warning this time, but a command. The sound echoed through the fog, deep and resolute. Mark turned to him, chest tight. "You see it too, don't you?" Rex stared back, eyes bright, the reflection of the moon caught in them like fire. He barked again, louder. Mark knelt beside him, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. "You think she's down there?" Rex gave a low growl, the kind that always meant yes. Mark exhaled shakily, scanning the ravine again. The fog shifted, curling around the rocks below. He could hear the river lapping faintly against the shore. His rational mind screamed, "Wait for backup. Don't be reckless." But another voice, the same one that had pushed him here against orders, whispered, "Keep going." He felt the weight of his badge missing from his chest. He wasn't here as a cop anymore. He was here as something else. A man chasing the last thread of hope for a child who still had a chance. His throat tightened. He whispered, almost to himself, "Show me, partner." Rex's ears twitched at the familiar phrase. For a moment, everything stilled. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Then the dog moved. Without hesitation, Rex bounded forward, leaping down the slope in a blur of muscle and shadow. Mud flew beneath his paws. Mark lunged instinctively, hand outstretched. "Rex!" But the dog was already halfway down, his body disappearing into the mist. "Damn it, Rex!" Mark stumbled to the edge, peering over. All he could see was the churn of fog and faint movement below. The sound of scraping claws echoed faintly, followed by silence. The world narrowed to his pounding heartbeat and the steady whisper of the river. He waited, every muscle tight, eyes straining against the dark. Then, faintly, a bark. Short, urgent. Mark's chest filled with something fierce and fragile. Hope. He tightened his grip on the ravine's edge, eyes burning against the cold. "Hold on, partner," he whispered. "I'm coming." The moon broke free from the clouds for a moment, flooding the basin in silver light. The fog shimmered like smoke over glass, and in that fleeting glow, the river looked almost alive, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Mark took one deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped toward the edge. Below, Rex barked again, once sharp and certain. The sound carried through the night, echoing across the water like a call that refused to fade. And as Mark climbed down into the darkness after him, the Trinity River seemed to whisper in return. Not words, but something older, something that sounded a lot like destiny. The sky split open without warning. One moment, there was only fog and silence. The next, the heavens roared. Thunder cracked, rolling across the river like a war drum. Fat drops of rain hit the leaves, the mud, Mark's face, cold, relentless, purging. He was halfway down the ravine when his boot slipped. The mud gave way beneath him, and he slid the rest of the way down, crashing through a curtain of reeds. Pain shot up his shoulder as he hit the ground, but he didn't stop. He was already on his feet, squinting through the rain. "Rex!" he shouted over the storm. His voice was swallowed by the sound of the wind tearing through the trees. Then, a bark. Close. Urgent. He turned toward the sound and saw Rex about 20 feet ahead. Mud splattered across his fur, claws tearing into the soaked earth as he dug furiously beneath a mound of tangled branches. The dog's barks came short and desperate, the kind that sent adrenaline spiking straight into Mark's chest. "Hold on, boy, I'm coming," he gasped, stumbling forward. The rain poured harder, sheets of water running down his face, soaking his clothes until they clung like armor. Every step sank into the mud, pulling at his boots, but he pushed through. When he reached Rex, he saw it. The way the dog's ears flattened, his movements frantic, his nose pressed deep into the earth. Something was there. Something real. Mark dropped to his knees beside him, helping dig with his bare hands. The mud was cold and thick, sticking under his nails, splattering his face. Branches cut into his skin, but he didn't feel it. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat and the sound of Rex's claws scraping the earth like a shovel. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth. His voice trembled. "Please." And then, a sound. So faint he thought at first it was the wind. But then it came again. A whimper, small, weak, human. Mark froze. His eyes shot to Rex. "You hear that?" Rex barked once, sharp and piercing, then resumed digging, throwing mud behind him in wild bursts. Mark's breath hitched. He clawed deeper into the tangle, hands trembling. His fingers brushed something cold, fabric. He pulled harder, revealing a flash of pink. The backpack. Jesus! His pulse spiked. He dug faster, ignoring the pain in his hands. The next handful of mud uncovered hair, blonde, matted, soaked with dirt. His stomach turned. "Emily!" He tore at the branches, ripping them away one by one until she was there. A small, motionless body, pale against the darkness. Her head rested at an awkward angle, her lips a faint blue. For one heartbeat, the world stopped. The rain, the thunder, the river, all fell silent. Then Mark moved. He pulled her free, cradling her against his chest. Her skin was ice. Mud streaked her face, her lashes clumped with water. No, he whispered, his voice breaking. "Come on, sweetheart. You're okay. You're gonna be okay." He tilted her chin back, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. A pause. Then the faintest flutter. A pulse. Weak, but there. "Rex!" he shouted, voice trembling with both fear and hope. "She's alive!" The dog barked furiously, circling them, tail stiff, ears high, as if keeping the world at bay. Lightning ripped across the sky, illuminating the scene in a flash of white. Mark's breath came in ragged bursts as he brushed wet hair from Emily's face. Her eyelids flickered. A faint sound escaped her lips, a broken, rasping breath. "That's it," Mark said, tears mixing with the rain. "Breathe for me. Just breathe." He tore off his jacket, wrapping it around her tiny frame. His hands shook uncontrollably as he fumbled for his radio, water dripping from the device. "This is Detective Rains," he shouted into the static. "I've got her. Repeat, I've got Emily Carter. She's alive but unresponsive. We're at the Trinity Ravine, half a mile west of Sector 7. I need medics here now." Static crackled. Then a voice. "Copy that, Rains. Hold position. Rescue team en route." Hold position. As if he could do anything else. Mark pulled Emily closer, feeling her shallow breaths against his chest. The storm didn't matter anymore. The mud, the pain, the orders, all of it faded beneath the single, fragile rhythm of that heartbeat. Rex stood by the riverbank now, barking into the darkness. One bark after another, steady and defiant. It wasn't just noise. It was warning. A sentinel's cry against the chaos of the night. Mark looked up, following the sound. The river was rising fast, swollen from the rain, water churning against the rocks below. "We can't stay here," he muttered. "We'll be swept out if it floods." He shifted Emily carefully in his arms and began to climb the embankment, his boots sliding on the slick earth. Rex moved beside him, pushing upward, barking with every step, as if urging him not to stop. Halfway up, Mark's strength began to falter. His shoulders screamed with pain. His lungs burned, but he kept going. "Don't you quit on me, kid," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You've got too much left to see." The sound of engines grew faint in the distance, sirens blending with thunder. Searchlights cut through the trees, beams bouncing off the rain. "Here!" Mark shouted. His voice cracked, raw from the storm. "Down here!" Moments later, two figures in reflective gear appeared at the ridge, ropes slung over their shoulders. "We've got visual," one called out. "Hang on, detective." Mark collapsed to his knees, still clutching Emily. Relief hit him so hard it felt like his bones might give way. He didn't even realize he was crying until Rex pressed his head against his shoulder, whining softly. "It's okay, partner," Mark whispered, stroking the dog's soaked fur. His voice trembled. "You did it. You found her." Rex's tail gave a weak wag. His eyes locked on Emily, as if refusing to look away. Even when the medics arrived and lifted her from Mark's arms, the dog tried to follow, paws scraping against the mud. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured, gripping his collar. "She's safe now. You did your job." As the paramedics secured Emily onto the stretcher, one of them shouted, "She's breathing! Weak pulse, but holding!" Mark closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. Really breathe. The air burned as it filled his lungs, sharp with rain and relief. The storm still raged around them, but it no longer felt hostile. The thunder sounded less like fury and more like applause. Rex stood beside him, chest heaving, fur plastered flat against his ribs. His ears flicked toward the stretcher lights moving up the slope, tracking every movement until Emily disappeared into the glow. Mark rested a trembling hand on Rex's head. "You hear that, partner?" he said softly, voice breaking through a tired smile. "She's alive." The dog looked up, eyes bright despite the rain. Lightning flashed once more, painting them both in white. Man and dog, mud-soaked and shaking, standing in the heart of the storm, together, unbroken. And as the rain poured down around them, Rex lifted his head and barked into the thunder, a sound that carried far across the river, a cry of victory, of defiance, of life reclaimed from the dark. The sterile glow of the hospital lights felt almost holy after the storm. The rain still lashed the windows outside, but inside, the air was thick with warmth, relief, and disbelief. Nurses moved quickly through the corridor, the smell of antiseptic clinging to every surface. In room 312, Emily Carter lay small and fragile beneath a mountain of white sheets. Her skin, once pale and lifeless, now held the faintest blush of pink. Monitors beeped in soft, steady rhythm, a fragile symphony of life returning. Mark Rains stood near the foot of the bed, his clothes still damp, mud stains dried to his boots. Every muscle in his body ached, but he couldn't bring himself to sit down. He just stood there, watching the slow rise and fall of the little girl's chest. It was proof that instinct, not protocol, had been right. Across the room, Grace Carter clutched her daughter's hand with trembling fingers. Her shoulders shook with every breath. When she finally looked up at Mark, her eyes were red, swollen, but alive. "She's going to be okay," Mark said softly, voice rough with exhaustion. Grace nodded, then rose and crossed the small distance between them. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, he froze, unsure of what to do. Then he let his hands rest awkwardly on her back. He felt her tears soak into his jacket. "You saved her," she whispered. "You and that dog. You brought my baby home." Mark swallowed hard. "No, ma'am. Rex did." Grace pulled back slightly, her face wet, but a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. "Then thank him for me," as if summoned by name. A low bark echoed from the hallway. Both turned to see Rex, tail wagging weakly, fur still damp from the rain. His paws clicked against the tile floor as he entered, head held high despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "Hey, partner," Mark said, kneeling down. Rex pressed his nose to Mark's shoulder, licking the dried mud from his sleeve. "You did good." Grace crouched down beside them, reaching out a cautious hand. Rex sniffed her fingers before leaning gently into her touch. It was the first time the woman had smiled in days, but before the quiet could settle, the door opened again, and the moment broke. Captain Torres stepped inside, his uniform immaculate as always, though his face carried something between pride and disapproval. Behind him trailed two other officers and a woman from the department's communications division, her phone already buzzing non-stop. Mark stood, straightening instinctively. "Detective Rains," Torres began, voice firm but low. "You've made quite a mess for us." Mark nodded once. "Yes, sir." Torres looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, stepping closer to the bed. His gaze softened when he saw the child sleeping. "You disobeyed direct orders. You went off-grid, risked departmental liability, and endangered yourself." Mark met his eyes. "And saved a life." Torres hesitated, jaw tightening. The argument forming, then dissolving. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You didn't make it easy for me." "I wasn't trying to," Mark replied quietly. Behind them, the PR officer spoke up, her tone too cheerful for the gravity of the room. "The media's already all over it, Captain. Local and state outlets picked up the story within the hour. Headline reads..." She glanced at her phone, scrolling. "K9 defies orders, saves girl. They're calling it a miracle." Torres groaned softly. "Of course they are." Grace looked between them, confused. "Defies orders?" Mark exhaled. "I wasn't supposed to be out there." The mother's eyes softened even more. "Then I'm glad you were." The PR officer was still typing. "The department's being painted as heroes. We'll hold a press briefing tomorrow. Photos of the dog, the rescue, the family reunion. It's great PR." Mark's stomach turned at the phrase. Great PR. That's what it had come down to. Not the fear, not the mud, not the heartbeat that nearly stopped beneath his hands. Just headlines. And applause. Torres shot the woman a look. That'll be all for now. When she left, the captain turned back to Mark. You understand what this means, don't you? You'll be written up. Internal will investigate. You could lose your badge for good this time. Mark nodded. If that's the price, I'll pay it. Torres's eyes flickered. Admiration, frustration, maybe both. You and that dog, you're something else. Mark didn't answer. He just looked down at Rex, who sat by his boot, ears twitching, eyes fixed on Emily. The dog had no idea about orders or politics. He only knew he'd done what he was born to do. Protect. A nurse entered quietly, checking Emily's vitals. Grace returned to her daughter's side, brushing her hair back tenderly. Mark felt the room's warmth tug at something inside him, a fragile peace he hadn't felt in years, but even peace carried a shadow. Later that night, long after the cameras and questions faded, Mark found himself walking through the dimly lit K9 wing of the precinct. The hall smelled of straw, disinfectant, and faint traces of old leather. The buzz of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound, until he reached the familiar kennel at the end. Rex lifted his head immediately, tail thumping once against the floor. His eyes caught the light. Tired, yet still burning with that loyal spark. Hey, partner, Mark said softly, kneeling beside the bars. They said you're the talk of the town, hero dog of the year. Rex tilted his head, as if unimpressed by the title. Mark smiled faintly. Yeah, I didn't think you'd care. He reached through the bars, scratching behind Rex's ear. You did good. Better than good. The dog's breathing slowed, steady and calm. His head rested against Mark's hand. But beneath the tenderness, an ache bloomed in Mark's chest. A quiet realization he didn't want to name. He'd seen this before. The system didn't like rebels, even the ones who saved lives. Rex was getting old. And now, after the storm, after the disobedience, there would be talk of retirement. They're not going to let us work together after this, Mark whispered, voice barely audible. You know that, don't you? Rex blinked slowly, a low rumble of contentment vibrating through his chest. Mark leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the kennel door, eyes closing. You found her when no one else would. You followed your heart, not their rules. Guess that's why they'll never understand you. For a long time he stayed like that, man and dog, sharing silence in the dim hum of the corridor. Outside, the first light of dawn began to edge through the clouds, washing the world in pale gold. The storm had finally passed. Mark stood, giving Rex one last scratch behind the neck. Get some rest, hero, he murmured. You've earned it. As he turned to leave, Rex gave one soft bark, a quiet goodbye, or maybe a promise that this wasn't the end. Mark paused at the door, his silhouette framed in the weak light. Yeah, he whispered. You too, partner. And as he walked away, the echo of Rex's tail against the kennel floor followed him, a fading rhythm of loyalty that no reprimand, no rule, could ever silence. The Texas sun was softer now, filtered through the veil of early autumn haze. Weeks had passed since the storm, since the night a little girl's cry broke through the mud and the thunder, and changed everything. The news vans had long packed up. The headlines faded from screens, but inside Mark Rains, something still echoed, something he couldn't shake. He sat in his truck outside the precinct, the engine idling low. The familiar hum of the old V8 filled the silence. On the passenger seat beside him sat Rex, resting his muzzle on the window frame, eyes following the slow movement of clouds overhead. The faint glint of his police K9 collar caught the sunlight, polished, proud, but soon to be meaningless. "Last ride, huh?" Mark murmured. His voice carried that quiet heaviness of a man pretending he wasn't saying goodbye. Rex turned his head, ears flicking at the sound of his partner's voice. His tail thumped once against the seat. "Yeah," Mark said softly, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "I know. You hate endings." He shifted the truck into gear, pulling out of the parking lot and onto the back roads that cut through the wide, golden sprawl of North Texas. The open fields stretched endlessly on both sides, the air shimmering with the last warmth of late September. They'd driven these roads countless times before, chasing leads, responding to calls, tracking missing people, lost hikers, runaways. But this drive was different. There was no dispatch call, no radio static, no destination. It was just the two of them. One last patrol before everything changed. The official notice had arrived 2 days ago. Detective Rains, reassigned to administrative duty pending review. K9 Unit Rex, retired early due to age and behavioral independence. That last phrase stuck to Mark like a thorn. Behavioral independence. As if loyalty, instinct, and courage were flaws to be corrected. He rolled down the window, letting the dry wind whip through his hair. The smell of cedar and sun-baked earth filled the cab, scents that always seemed to calm Rex. The dog lifted his head, nostrils flaring, tail wagging faintly, as if remembering every track, every chase, every scent trail they'd ever followed. "You remember our first call, partner?" Mark asked, glancing over. "Gas station robbery out near Odessa. I was still green to the K9 unit, didn't even know how to clip your vest on right." Rex huffed softly, as if in agreement. "You dragged me halfway across a cornfield before finding the guy hiding in a tractor shed," Mark continued, chuckling under his breath. "You cornered him so fast I almost forgot to draw my gun. You were fearless even then." The road curved gently toward a line of trees, the sunlight breaking into dappled patches through the windshield. Mark's smile faded as the next memory surfaced, one that never left him. "That night in Lubbock," he said quietly, eyes on the road ahead. "The ambush. You remember that, don't you?" He didn't expect an answer, but the weight in the cab shifted. Rex lifting his head, eyes alert now, sensing the change in his partner's tone. Mark's mind slipped back to that night. The sharp pop of gunfire, the chaos of sirens and shadows. He could still feel the shock of the bullet slicing the air near his ear, the burn of shrapnel against his neck. He'd gone down behind a rusted dumpster, adrenaline drowning out the pain. And then, Rex. Charging through the dark without command, teeth bared, tackling the gunman before the second shot fired. He could still hear the sound Rex made when he hit the ground, that low, pained whimper that twisted Mark's chest every time he remembered it. "They said you were lucky," Mark murmured, "that the bullet only grazed you. But I know. You took that hit for me." Rex's paw pressed lightly against his arm. The same quiet comfort as always. "You saved me long before that," Mark continued. "I was lost when they assigned you to me. You reminded me why I put on the badge." The truck stopped on the gravel shoulder overlooking the Trinity River. Calm now, golden beneath the afternoon sun. Mark turned off the engine, the world falling silent, but for cicadas and wind through reeds. Rex sat upright, muzzle grayed, the faint scar on his shoulder catching the light. Mark reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small leather collar. Plain, worn, familiar. He turned it in his hands, brushing the engraved tag. Rex. He looked at the brass police collar still around Rex's neck. Heavy, gleaming, a symbol of duty long fulfilled. "It's time," he said softly. The jingle of metal filled the cab as he unclipped it, setting it on the dashboard. Then he fastened the leather one in its place. Rex met his gaze. Calm, understanding. "You're free now, buddy," Mark whispered. "No badge, no orders, just you." Rex leaned forward and licked his hand. Slow, deliberate. A salute. A thank you. A promise. Mark swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." They stepped out into the fading light, side by side, watching the river wind below, the same river that had tested them and bound them forever. "Looks peaceful now," Mark murmured. "Guess we both earned that." Rex sat steady beside him, tail brushing the earth. Mark rested a hand on his back. "Come on, partner," he said gently. "Let's go home." Together, they turned from the Swat River, leaving behind the echoes of sirens and the weight of duty, carrying only what mattered, a bond beyond words. The Texas summer had softened into spring again, that gentle in-between season when the air smelled of rain and wildflowers. The Trinity River, once wild and violent, now flowed quietly beneath the sun, gold and silver across its calm surface. It had been a year since the storm, since the mud, the sirens, the cry beneath the leaves. Mark Raines stood on the same slope, boots pressing into soft grass that had grown over the old scars. Beside him lay Rex, his muzzle grayer now, the plain collar worn smooth. Retirement suited him. No sirens, no chaos, just peace and the river's hum of memory. A car pulled up the trail. Grace Carter stepped out first, followed by Emily, taller now, her yellow sundress bright against the green. She clutched a pink backpack, the same one from that morning a year ago. "Detective Mark!" she called. He smiled. "Hey there, kiddo." Rex perked up, rising slowly. When Emily saw him, she dropped the backpack and ran. "Rex!" She fell to her knees, arms around his neck, as he pressed his head to her shoulder. "I missed you," she whispered, then unzipped the pack. "I brought you something." Dog treats, chicken and peanut butter. Rex sniffed and took one gently from her palm. Mark watched, a lump rising in his throat. Grace joined him quietly. "She talks about him all the time," she said. "Says he's her guardian angel." "He kind of is," Mark murmured. They stood in silence, the river whispering nearby. "How's he holding up?" Grace asked. "Slower now," Mark said, smiling faintly. "But he still listens better than most cops I know." Grace laughed softly. "He's earned his rest." "Yeah," Mark agreed. "We both have." Emily lay in the grass with Rex's head on her lap, whispering something only he could hear. When the sun began to dip, its light spilled molten gold across the water. Grace took a photo, Emily and Rex side by side at the river's edge. Mark joined them, resting a hand on Rex's back. "Still guarding her, huh?" he said. Emily looked up. "Do you come here a lot?" "Sometimes," he said. "Helps me think about second chances, about how some things aren't lost, just waiting to be found." She nodded, stroking Rex's fur. The air grew still, filled with that quiet kind of peace that holds everything that mattered. As they prepared to leave, Emily ran back once more, hugging Rex tight. "Bye, hero," she whispered. "I love you." Rex's tail thumped faintly against the earth. Mark knelt beside him, voice low and full. "You did good, buddy. Better than good." The river shimmered beneath the fading light, carrying their story onward, a reminder that love, not logic, is what truly saves lives. Sometimes, stories like Mark and Rex's remind us that the bond between a person and their dog isn't built on words. It's built on trust, loyalty, and quiet understanding. A German Shepherd's love runs deep. It's protective, patient, and unwavering. They don't just follow commands, they follow hearts. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that silent connection, that feeling that they just know, then you already understand what makes them extraordinary. It's not about training or obedience. It's about love that asks for nothing in return. If you'd like to strengthen that bond, to understand your dog on a deeper level, there's a wonderful resource I've been using. Something that helps people communicate better with their dogs. You can check it out if you'd like. No pressure. Just something I personally found meaningful. Because in the end, our dogs don't just walk beside us. They teach us about loyalty, forgiveness, and what it means to truly care. And if we're lucky, we get to spend our lives returning just a little of the love they give so freely.